I'm going to talk about how sort of some level of change came to me over the last year. And it's a story about my trying to encourage my daughter to, she wanted to go and study law. And somebody had to, she met somebody else in the family who told her, studying law is boring. You're going to suffer a lot, so kind of opt for something else. And I was telling her, well, maybe there's another angle to this. Think of a cause, and then law becomes interesting. You know, think of something you want to really fight for, and then law becomes a real instrument. And so in that process, I went along and found some lady who was visiting. Her name is Polly Higgins. And she was talking about the law of ecocide. So I took my daughter, and my daughter was very impressed and, of course, very inspired about studying law. And there I met Polly Higgins, and I said, look, this is about my daughter and the future generations, and I think this is a very good idea, and so on. And then when I went back home, I realized that my daughter was changing her plans about studying law. She started to have a passion for chemistry. So I thought, my God, these plans are now going to be ruined. So I said, I can't really. I mean, there are many parents who do this, right? Thinking about this as a next generational issue. This whole environmental crisis is going to hit them harder, and therefore let's prepare them and so on. But what about my own responsibility? You know, what can I do? So that kind of hit me very hard, and I stood naked in a way that I have to do something myself. So there I am. After a pretty short journey, I became the head of Stop Ecocide Foundation. And our goal is really to revive our relationship with nature. That's the vision, right? That is, I think, a reconnection with nature we heard earlier today. We heard the call of the bird, call of perhaps the future species that are facing extinction. And so I feel that responsibility, and people working with me too. So we work to create awareness, coordinate the support, and establish something called the Ecocide law, the law of ecocide. I'll tell you more about it now. The current definition of ecocide is the extensive loss or damage or destruction of ecosystems of a given territory, so large, whether by human agency or other causes, to such an extent that peaceful enjoyment by the inhabitants of that territory has been or will be severely diminished. So basically, large-scale destruction of ecosystems is ecocide, very similar to the other one we know is genocide. This is the organization, the website. We are still, in construction, and this is the lawyer called Polly Higgins, who really has become the spokeswoman. She's called the lawyer of the earth, because she also had a calling, like I felt, is that she wanted to become the lawyer of the earth and protect the earth from what's going on. Yeah. So this is our team. It's a diverse group of people. And let me come to talk about the ecocide itself. So, like genocide, there are 4 crimes of peace, they're called, in the ICC, International Criminal Court in The Hague. I know somebody's from The Hague here. And how do they operate is that 123 countries sign up to these so-called crimes of peace, crimes of humanity, and so on. And these are above all other national principles of law, and they have an obligation to also implement them in their own countries. Yeah. So all sort of international community collectively agreed that genocide is no longer acceptable. Yeah? International community also agreed crimes of aggression is no longer acceptable. What we don't have right now is a situation where we have a lot of destruction with the environment going on, and we can't prosecute people, we can't hold people responsible in the same way as we do with genocide or other crimes. And I don't know about you, but it is startling to hear every other week major pieces of destruction going on. You know, the 2/3 of the barrier reef irreversibly destroyed, or melting ice caps. So somehow we need a mechanism to stop that from happening. So this is the goal of the organization. We want to bring in this law, and to bring in this law, it needs 2/3 of these 125 countries to vote in. And that's not easy, because last time the Ecocide law was presented, some countries didn't want it in completely. Yeah? And therefore the same forces will be there in terms of being reluctant, but there are also new forces, like a lot of island states that are threatened by sea level rise. We believe they are willing to possibly table this new law and defend it and ask for others, because it's a different way of asking for support. Rather than have this destruction or major things happen, crises and calamities, and have migration from it, it's maybe better to ask for this law to be in place, so this as a preventative mechanism, and also a recognition that they can get help. So this is what we are working towards. As a change, we are all change people, and from a change perspective, I'm trying to give you an analogy of why this is so important. And one analogy, and I talked to Ian the other night about it, is when the slave trade was happening. When slave trade was happening in the 1800s, a lot of the colonies and a lot of states and businesses were saying it's going to ruin them if the slave trade is going to be abolished. And there were 300 bilateral agreements like we have on climate change right now, or climate-related laws. And they were not effective. But in the day that they signed a collective agreement as an international crime of slavery, that changed everything. From one day to the next, all those who said they couldn't live without slaves adapted, and the journey was fine. As we know, they did fine. So what I'm seeing, I don't know about you, but what I'm seeing about climate change and CO2 regulations, etc., it's very much like the slave trade, how it was being regulated at the time. They talked about number of hours slaves could work. They talked about how many slaves a particular business could own. And I can see quite a lot of similarities with CO2 regulations and all the countries trying to do that, while ultimately these are all good, but it still sustains something that is morally unacceptable. So what we are trying to bring up is the notion that it is also, once it is accepted law, it's also a moral issue, that we can no longer continue doing that. So how are we doing that? We are working on several fronts. One, this is just scenarios we are looking at in terms of how many states are needed to vote in the law. And the scenario one is the current state. So we need 2/3 majority in order to vote it in. I think it's this. And 23 are these small island states. So that will be their voice, let's say. And if we bring in more small island states by supporting them to take part in the ICC, then it's likely that we'll have them contributing to 2/3 in a much greater way. That's one of these tactics we're thinking about. Yeah. Also, we have this is the detail here is not so important, but these are the 4 different areas we're working on. One is the Ecocide law with the states being able to vote it in. There's a lot of discussion between senior lawyers and work being done because ICC is in itself ready to accommodate more environmental issues because of the stage that ICC is in related to Africa, related to the cases they're pursuing. There's a lot of criticism about it. So we do with trying to bring about the Ecocide law, but in order to get there, we need public awareness, we need the political will, and we need also a legal consensus because lawyers debate the terms a lot. So they also need to come together. So we created a platform trying to do all 4 of them simultaneously. And as an organizational design, since I'm looking at change and I'm sort of trained at change, so I'm thinking about an organization, I'm building it in terms of a hybrid. So on one side, a lot of these activities cannot be too fragmented, they're not effective, so they should be able to collaborate, work together, have a common mission and some coordination. At the same time, it should be able to affect and relate to individuals who all heard the calling of the bird, so that people can take part in a change like this in various ways. So it's kind of an emergent change. So I'm looking at this as a very hybrid change approach. On one side, strong coordination leadership with a lot of limitations about how much you can do and how many resources you can have, and then enabling, giving voice to people who might be affected by a great change like that. So, I must say, at this stage, I'm not the first one to think about Ecocide. Ecocide, that notion of Ecocide has been around for a while. It was already tabled previously, so we're just trying to bring it back, and it's become more current now than it was. And I will probably not also be the one who kind of finishes the job, but I'm just coming in through this long process of other people who are participating and will be participating. It's a movement, and what Ecocide will do is help all kinds of other initiatives whereby doing this anything that is going to be having those implications of mass destruction will no longer be acceptable. Yeah? So we think that it is a key, something that needs to change, just the way many big changes happen, like the slave trade. There are some other examples like that. We think that is going to help all other change initiatives going around. So we are in this in a very big way with others. So I will be just, me and my team will be just part of the movement that's going to collaborate and coordinate with everyone. Yes, I want to part by saying, an expression that I like dearly. It is called Tashi Delay. It's a Tibetan expression. It says, "I honor the greatness in you." And I think, just like the call of the bird we heard, we have to address these issues in ways that it really matters to us individually and personally. That's how I got involved. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a lobbyist, I'm not many things. But I am working with this because I think it is no longer an issue that an issue we can leave just to others. Thank you.
Have you started, I mean, it seems like getting 100 countries on board seems like the right strategy, but I mean, have you started, like, look at legalization of marijuana, for example, which I've been heavily involved with in Colorado.
Yeah.
It starts with almost like a micro effort. Like you get one municipality, small jurisdictions to adopt the policies, and then you can largely demonstrate their value outward. I mean, have you guys started that? Have you thought about that strategy at all?
Yeah, that is definitely happening.
Okay.
For example, the river Ganges in India has gotten rights as
Right.
nature, so the rights of nature movement going on, and the countries, I think, is it Peru, has it enshrined in their constitution, the rights for nature. So it's part. Ecuador, yeah. And so we are part of, we are connecting with all these other people trying to do the same thing.
Right.
It is very important that it also has that local dimension of generating the right form, right version or right form of laws that apply to their
Right.
communities, because it's not only very top down. I totally agree with you. That's
I was just curious.
that's important.
How do you assess culpability in an ecocide situation? I mean, you gave the example of genocide, and you think about what's going on in Myanmar right now, and
Yep.
it's quite easy, or potentially could be satisfactory to point a finger at a chain of command
Yep.
that's resulted. But how do you assess culpability in ecocide?
Yeah.
Arguably, each and every one of us who've travelled here today have, in some small way, made a contribution to the diminution of the barrier reef. So,
Yeah, there
you're
is
going to lock us all up, sort of thing.
Yeah, not being an expert, there is a notion of superior responsibility.
Okay.
So you try to identify in the hierarchy of chain of decision making
Mm-hmm.
who had this important choice, and they made that.
Mm-hmm.
And the more known a concept like genocide becomes, then we know that people are consciously making that decision.
Yes.
Yeah? So it is preventative as well as punitive. Yeah? Once all these countries accept this as a overriding notion.
Okay.
Yeah? So superior responsibility, decision makers, leaders of states, and leaders of organizations, the important decision makers, will be personally liable.
Okay.
It was interesting that you drew in a parallel to the abolition of slavery. One of the issues is that, in fact, there still is a very large amount of slavery going on.
Sure.
And there's a point of view, and I'm not sure what I think about this, but there is a point of view that says that when you make something illegal, you then drive it underground. So if you legalize pollution, and then it's easier to regulate than it is if you make it illegal. So marijuana, for example, much better if we make it legal than making it illegal. So I wondered, although it's counterintuitive, if you make damaging the environment illegal, will this not just drive people to behave in secretive ways?
Yeah, let's take that a little bit further. The fact that we have laws preventing people from stealing doesn't mean there is no more stealing, right? So what we do collectively is not prevent any form of ecocide to happen, but collectively agree that it is no longer acceptable. It's some kind of a moral side to it. So how would it go underground? It's already going big time underground. If you look at all the local laws of air pollution, water pollution, all those things. And also another big problem we have with corporations, for example, is the fact that they say we are doing it in another country and another jurisdiction. So the US laws, for example, which can be quite stringent, or European laws, are not applied because they can get away with them. So we do need a mechanism which is never perfect in the terms of controlling what people do, but has some teeth to it, to help in multiple ways. But yeah, will mass ecocide go underground? Well, it's above ground right now, if you look at what's happening, right? So we can't make it worse.
Yeah.
Shekhar, sorry, just about slavery. This is a really noble initiative. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I understand the parallel with slavery because it was economically so viable for all colonial empires. I recently watched a documentary, it was a series, on slavery in Great Britain. And several things came up. First of all, abolition took a long time because so many families, including the reverends, were making money in the colonies having slaves.
Yeah.
And finally, there was abolition, but what I didn't realize is that in order for abolition to take place, the government compensated these families. It was the biggest, relatively speaking, the compensation to families in Great Britain over 2 or 3 years was the biggest payout that any country has ever made, which in fact was, relatively speaking at the time, much, much bigger than the payout which was made to the financial industry in 2008.
Yeah. So what you're saying by that is that there will be great responses to this. That means all the corporations that are going to suffer, they were going to find these mechanisms of doing what is right and stop doing what is very problematic. Do you see what I mean?
Of course, the economics have
that
to be faced.
that we have this greatness in us in a way. That's why I ended with that quote, that we have the greatness to be able to, and we have seen it with slavery, that they can pay reparations, they can do all this. It's just that we need to get this really strong and front and center, that we can't go on destroying ecosystems that are so important for our own survival too. Yeah.
So one of the hats I've worn is helping our county make land use decisions. And one of the things I realized, and it's something that I think it happens across the country in the United States, is the trade-off between outcomes, who holds risk, right? So businesses want to minimize the risk that they're exposed to. And so the dynamic I was seeing on environmental decision making is a company would come in and say, we want to put a pipeline down. The county would say, you got to put that pipeline at least 50 feet away. It costs that company more money, so they would complain. But what happens if 50 feet wasn't enough? The community held that risk, and the company offloaded that. And so one of the things we looked at the regulatory structure was, rather than being prescriptive and saying, okay, here's what you have to do, and we didn't really know what needed to be done to protect the environment, we said, you hold the risk, right? So, because if you tell them 50 feet is enough, that absolves them of the responsibility, as opposed to flipping that around and saying, you're going to have to make the decision about what it's going to take to make certain that you don't pollute the water, and if you're wrong, then you hold the accountability for that. And so one of the dirty things I think that's been going on in the environmental movement is the environmental movement will often, they will be satisfied with invoking pain on companies because it makes their supporters happy that it costs more to put in the pipeline. But the companies are also sort of happy with that because they're paying a little bit of money in order to hand off the risk to the local communities. So there's some small changes in how regulations are adopted to make them outcome focused rather than just exacting some pain out of those companies.
I think it's a very important principle. There's something called a disjunctive test, which was a legal term. Again, I'm not an expert, but what it does is that it puts the onus on actors, everyone, to make their own judgment of what is right or wrong. So it's about, like, rape is a good analogy. We are not going to tell you what's rape and in every condition or situation. It's on you to avoid committing it. We give you some guidelines as to what rape could be, and you have a sense as a human being. These are morally unacceptable behaviors and so on. So we don't it is on the individuals themselves to not commit these. So in the case of ecocide law, the size of a territory and the number of seasons an ecosystem is disrupted and the kind of impact it has are all sort of the measures. But it's on the organization. There's no body that's going to tell them, look, you cannot do that. It's for them to take on this stewardship role of not committing the crime. You see, in my view, it's related, that it is, you give the responsibility of regulating to the organizations here that are involved. We just deal with the with the law, saying this is what is not acceptable, and it's for them to self-monitor.
Maybe another way of framing it is, I think it's important to hold individuals and corporations responsible for outcomes and not for processes. And often we're holding them accountable for the process, but not the outcome.
I can only agree with you, because just that's where the whole mission is being lost in trying to sort out the finer detail here, and CO2 emissions, the emissions trading, I cannot comment so much in terms of I think there's also maybe complementary effect, that maybe there needs to be a lot of regulation and controls and health related controls in society. But the approach that we are taking with ecocide law is definitely the other one, which is you're responsible to act ethically and not commit big crimes.
I guess I'm challenged by this, because I say, okay, so there's a law against genocide.
Yeah.
I mean, how well has that worked over the last 50 years, really? I mean, do the guys who are going to commit genocide sort of think, oh, actually, no, let's not, because it's illegal? I just don't think that's how it works.
But wouldn't people say that
You know,
about stealing?
Genocides, if you look what happened in Rwanda, A, the people did it,
Yeah.
and even though it was clearly illegal, but also what did the international community do to intervene to stop it? I think we haven't got a great record on this. So I'm not saying that it damages it, but I'm struggling to see that it's definitely a mechanism that really helps.
Wouldn't we say that about stealing too?
Yeah, but she
That there are laws against stealing and yet people steal?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same.
I mean, yeah, I'm a little bit on that thought. I mean, I think it's a really a noble cause. I'm just trying to get my head around it, because it's like what Kit said. Because one of Ecocide's scenario, and I think we may be looking into it already, is that there are places that are ecocide that has been caused by tourism, yeah? But this tourism has also fed the local population, yeah? So in that scenario then, for example, how do you define who has the superior responsibility? You see? And
It's no longer acceptable, and it's the same thing when in cases of rape or slavery or ecocide. It's no longer acceptable to use ecocide as something that is, or other reasons like livelihood and people depending on this. I mean, that's what the corporations will tell you. They say we really depend on this. I mean, the banks have told a lot of us in different countries, we need to be saved, we need to be
Sure, I get what you're saying, and I'm not even going where the corporations are, right? But we also know that, I mean, we all have traveled, and we have seen places where if it wasn't for tourism, they would die,
That's what we think it will happen. But I think we need to find the third way in all these binary situations, that we must find a way. There is no other way. in the sense that we cannot destroy the environment any further.
Agree, but given the time, I'm gonna cut you short, I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
But Jacob will be there for the rest of the conference, because I do think,
Yeah.
we need to continue, so thank you.
Yeah, I
Jacob,
was
so
waiting
much.
for you to stop me. Thank you very much.